All right. Good afternoon. I was hoping you would all leave after lunch, but I think more showed up. So that's a little intimidating. Jen Con told me to just picture everyone in their underwear. That's even more terrifying than this right now. But so we're going to make sure that this works. All right. When your faith is tested, the scars of this are very real for me, and I will cry through most of this, and I apologize. So just bear with me, okay? I will gather my composure, and we will move on. So Myatt was born Monday, July 23rd, 2018. I had a flawless pregnancy and a flawless delivery. When Ryan asked me to talk to the leaderettes about this, I was like, how am I going to talk to them about childbirth? That's not my responsibility. So I'm glad that there are other ladies here. So that works out, because at the time he just told me it was just the leaderettes. So anyway, so everything went great. Everything went perfect. Had a great delivery, had a great pregnancy. So great that my brother was ready to catch when Myatt was born. A lot of family came in during laboring. I had an epidural. Everything was great. Everything went great. Myatt came out crying. Myatt came out screaming. They laid him on my chest, and Dr. DeLacy left the room. He requested a lady come in. Her name was Holly. She was a NICU or nursery nurse. She wasn't supposed to be in there for the actual delivery part, but he wanted her to be in there specifically for Myatt. She left. She was on lunch. She came in. She left after everything went great. I tell you that because I'm going to come back to that in just a moment on why she was there. He came out. We don't know his length because everything went crazy, but he came out perfectly healthy, 7 pounds, 15 ounces at 1:45 in the afternoon. You don't know how quickly things can happen and how fast your life can change. Some people it's a phone call. Some people it's a car accident. Some people it's a cancer diagnosis. For us, it took 20 minutes for our world to go from up here to crashing down on us. Holly came back in to the room. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be in the nursery with the babies being born. She came back in, and later on I asked her, I said, Holly, why did you come back to my room? You weren't supposed to be there. This will give you goosebumps. She told me, Kylee, I don't know why. I felt led to come back in. Holly came back in. She looked at Myatt and she said these words that I will never forget. Mama, I don't like his color. Let me see him. She took him off my chest, and when babies are born, they're really yucky color, and they've got nasty stuff all over them, so from my angle down, I couldn't tell that anything was wrong with him. She took him over beside me. She listened to his lungs, and she said, I just don't like the way he's breathing. I'm going to take him to the nursery, and I'll come let you know something. So we got to visit Myatt in the NICU, or in the nursery at NEA twice. The first time it was just him and Holly, and we walked in and we got to see him and talk to him and hold his little hand, and people took pictures from the window, and everything was okay. His stats that we were watching on the monitor, they were good. He was on a little bit of oxygen, no big deal. Went back to the room, and I don't know how long, it's all a blur, I don't know how long, but Dr. Beck came in and talked to us, and he said his blood work when we checked it is not where it needs to be. So we're going to intubate him. And working at NEA, I know what that means. I know that they don't have the capability of handling an intubated child. They have to be shipped out. So I knew at that point that Myatt wasn't going to stay at NEA with me. He was going to be gone. So when we went back to the NICU, I keep saying NICU, I'm sorry, the nursery the next time, it was a little more chaotic. The respiratory was in there, the nurses were in there, they were trying to intubate Myatt, and JC was a respiratory therapist that was in there. And kind of like Carla talked about how in the moment you know God's with you, but when you look back at all the things that happened, there were so many God things that happened to us. JC was a senior respiratory therapist. He had worked for years at a NICU. He had seen babies just like Myatt, and he knew kind of what was happening. He stayed past his shift to intubate Myatt for us because they had one unsuccessful attempt. So he was intubated twice. Before he was intubated, he had a pulmonary hemorrhage, so that means somewhere in his lungs he started bleeding, and we don't know why that happened. So JC knew not to suction Myatt when he saw that blood because he knew it would make it worse. So he actually stayed and he intubated him for us, and he checked on Myatt so many times. He came back to my director and he said, "How's my baby? How's he doing?" He wanted to know all the time. So this is Myatt's tiny little body, and this is the helicopter that took him. This is the flight team. I had to call my family back. My brother and sister-in-law, they live in Salem, and they were leaving. And I called them back, and I said, "Myatt's going to Le Bonheur. I need somebody to stay with me at the hospital because Andrew and his family are going to Memphis to be with him." So they came back. Through the night, Andrew sent me updates. I remember laying in the bed, hooked up to all the monitors and stuff, because I was actually bleeding myself, and I couldn't do anything. They talked about possibly doing surgery on me that night. There was just a lot going on, so my mom stayed with me. They came in every hour to 30 minutes to give me a massage. That is the worst massage you will ever have in your life. They need to rename that. But they came in because I was bleeding, and Dr. DeLacy the next morning accused me of stealing blood from somebody else because my blood levels were actually higher, which they're not supposed to be. If you bleed all night, your blood levels should go down. So that morning when he came to discharge me, my blood levels were actually higher than when I arrived. And he said, "There's no way that that's physically possible or medically possible." He said, "I don't know how that happened, but your blood levels are higher." He said, "So I'm discharging you, you're good to go." So Myatt made it to the NICU, and this is our room. And this is from one of the NICU nurses. I texted her about 2 weeks ago, and she sent this to me. So this is where the baby would be at. And then this is a chair that turns into a bed for you. And behind this wall right here is where the parents can actually go back there and still be in the room, but kind of disconnect. And so things would happen, and Myatt's monitors would beep, and people would come in, and we were able to disconnect. We could go back there and still be in the room, but not see what's going on. And there's actually 2 chairs for the parents to lay in. There's a dresser you could put all your stuff in, and then these would be the monitors that the babies would be hooked up to. This is all oxygen and that kind of stuff. And so that's a little bit about what the nursery room looks like, and so whenever I talk about it, you'll kind of have an idea. So this is Myatt, this is at Le Bonheur. So this is, after I had arrived, these are pictures, so this would have been Tuesday morning. Getting there, going into the room and seeing his tiny body, that was hard. And you're physically and emotionally drained from just having birth and everything that I went through at NEA to seeing this. But the team of doctors, I wasn't there for very long, and they just ran in and started asking questions, and they were very attentive. And so it was really comforting to know that he was in such good hands. You'll hear me talk about Dr. Rana. She was one of the main doctors that was over him. So they kind of rotate out. They'll work, 7 hour or 12 hours, have another doctor so they could sleep. But Dr. Rana at one point worked a 24-hour shift. So she was there all night, all morning kind of thing. So she had a big part in Myatt. But in the NICU, they get babies that are smaller than my hand, ounces. They're tiny babies. And so when this 7-pound, 15-ounce monster came in, they're like, "Whoa, he's feisty, he is a fighter, he's looking good." Andrew and I, being medical, we asked so many questions. They told us so many times, "Calm down, parents, he'll be okay." it was emotional to see him like that. We got there Tuesday, and he had some problems with his vent, and so they're like, let's extubate him. Let's just see how he does. We need to put a new tube down. So Dr. Rana pulls the tube out, and all of a sudden, Myatt cries, and his sats are beautiful. And she's like, okay, well, let's see how he does. So that hope and that excitement that, hey, he's going to prove all you wrong, he's going to be fine, that was exciting stuff. I remember going out to the lobby telling the family, hey, he's good, he's breathing on his own. He cried, he let out the biggest scream. He was doing good. But about 2 hours later, back down he went. So they re-intubated him, restarted everything, and once you're on an antibiotic, they keep you there. So we knew we'd be there for 7 to 10 days at this point. And at this point also, hadn't really talked to very many people. I'd posted in our Secret Sister group, but hadn't really posted on Facebook, hadn't really told anybody what was going on. So this was still pretty localized to who knew everything about Myatt. At one point, we were asking so many questions that the fellow, so you have your attending, which is your top dog. You have your fellow, which is a doctor that's still in training, but underneath the attending. Then you have your resident. So those are kind of the tiers of the medical. So we asked so many questions. At one point, the fellow was like, parents, he'll be okay, just calm down. So the next day, this was Wednesday. This was 2 days after having Myatt, I got to hold him. This is the arm of Kristen. She was a godsend. She actually handed Myatt to me and walked out of the room and started bawling herself because of how much emotion we had and love we had for Myatt. She is still a friend. She's actually the one that sent me that NICU picture. We talk to her constantly. There are people in place in your life during tragedy and during times like this that will be with you for the rest of your life, and she was amazing. She handed him to me. She told me later that she had to leave because of everything, all the emotion. So Wednesday morning started out amazing. I got to hold Myatt. They want you to hold him for a minimum of 45 minutes because of having to move him around with the intubation and that kind of stuff. They don't want to jostle him a lot. So I think I probably could have held him for the rest of his life, but I'm being sore and in that rocker and that kind of stuff, and they wanted that day to place a PICC line. And a PICC line went into his right arm, and it went about right here. And that was how they were going to give him medicine, because after so long the veins started to blow and not hold up. So they wanted to give him medicine. So everything was looking great. Everything was doing good. He was doing really well. And Andrew and I decided to stay at the FedEx house, which is what they offer to families. It's right across the street. There's a shuttle that comes back and forth. You're on a waiting list. So at the beginning, we told them, no, we don't want it, because there's babies that are sicker than Myatt. There are people here that need it worse than we do. We can stay in his room, it's fine. But we were tired and exhausted, and he was doing so well. We were like, okay, we'll take you up. We'll go to the FedEx house. So that was about the start of the good day. And then after that, it plummeted. And to really convey that message for everyone, I actually talked to Spencer, and Spencer's like, you need to write Myatt's story out. People need to hear this. People need to hear what God did through Myatt. So I started typing up Myatt's story when he was 7 months old. And it's been really hard for me to dive back into all that. Myatt's skinny chart is 482 pages front and back. So to dive into that and read that all over again is traumatizing. So I have actually typed up Myatt's story, and I'm going to read a little excerpt from it because I really want to convey what happens these next 2 days to you guys. And I think that this is the best way to do that is through what I typed up. So this kind of begins after we've went to the FedEx house, we've dropped off all our stuff, we've came back to the hospital, and they've placed the PICC line. And up until that point, just remember that everything had been going really well. So once we arrived, they told us that Myatt was feisty and he became aggravated with the PICC line they placed, so they let him rest and increased his sedation medication. At that time, Dr. Weems was on Myatt's service. He had made the decision to put Myatt on nitric oxide. to try to open up the air spaces of his lungs. He told us that he would be able to see some improvement within about 2 hours. Dr. Weems discussed with us the possibility of using an oscillating vent. An oscillating vent gives higher air pressures to keep the lungs open. It also vibrates the child while they're being ventilized to kind of rattle and shake up all that stuff. I remember them telling us this and thinking to myself that the oscillating vent was the worst case scenario. I was very naive on what was to come. Once the 2 hours were up, Myatt showed very little improvement on the nitrogen, but Dr. Weems decided that he would keep him on it anyway. Before leaving the hospital that evening, we told the overnight nurse to call us if she needed anything or if there were any changes. Looking back now, had I known what the morning held and that I wouldn't get to hold Myatt for 10 more days, I would have never let him go. Wednesday night was our first night to spend away from the hospital, or any hospital for that matter. We spent the night at the FedEx house. We had told the nurse to call us if there were anything that they needed or if there were any changes. They told us that if they didn't hear from us, that it was a good sign. I woke up every 3 hours through the night to pump for Myatt. I had breastfed Benton, and I had planned to do the same for Myatt. Every time I woke up, I would immediately check my phone to make sure I hadn't missed a call from the nurse. I remember waking up the last time to pump, thinking that Myatt must have had a really good night because we didn't receive a call. Around 6 a.m. Thursday morning, we received a call from the overnight nurse. She wanted to get our consent to give Myatt a blood transfusion. Well, of course, we gave our consent, and when we hung up the phone, I started to cry. I had been so confident through the night that everything was going in the right direction. The nitrogen was hopefully working. The PICC line, they were able to give him medicine easier. But little did we know that things were about to go from bad to worse. That morning, we made our way from the FedEx house across the street to the hospital. When we arrived, we saw a familiar face. Kristen was Myatt's nurse again. Before the doctors made their morning rounds, Dr. Rana walked by Myatt's room. She was working a 24-hour shift. She had been on all night and would be on all day today. She came by with wet hair, so I assumed that she had just gotten out of the shower. Dr. Rana told us that Myatt didn't allow her to get much sleep last night. I remember thinking to myself, why didn't you call us then? I know now that there was nothing that we could have done, and us being there wouldn't have really changed anything, but I remember feeling like I had a lot of false hope. When the team of doctors rounded that morning, they gave us more information about how Myatt did through the night. They told us that he took a turn for the worst. His breathing became more increasingly labored with retractile breathing. His chest x-ray looked worse, and his CRP was increasing. CRP stands for C-reactive protein, which shows infection in the body. So at this point, they thought that Myatt possibly had an infection versus pulmonary hypertension. They weren't exactly sure, so they were treating him with multiple antibiotics. They decided to change up the antibiotics to fight a broader spectrum of infection. At this point, they knew that Myatt had pulmonary hypertension based on the echo, but they just didn't know how severe it was. Dr. Ronis told us that Myatt was doing some atypical things, that he for the most part looked great physically, but his lab work looked great for the most part, but physically he kept declining. He was becoming more jaundiced, so that required a bilirubin light. Kristen warned us that even though the bilirubin light was the most non-invasive thing they could do for a baby, it instantly made them look even sicker. Dr. Rana told us that they wanted to minimize the type of noise and physical stimulation just to let Myatt rest in peace. She told us she wanted to limit the amount of visitors back to Myatt's room. This was a lot of information for us to take in. I was devastated that I couldn't hold or even really touch Myatt. As we tried to process it all, Dr. Rana made it a little worse. She advised us that it would be in our best interest to stay at the hospital that night instead of going back to the FedEx house. These were terrifying words. I asked her if it was time to call in family members. She said, "We're not there yet, but family support is always needed." Andrew and I took a minute to ourselves to regain our composure, and I called my mom. Mom and Dad had been at the house in Jonesboro with Benton, but it was time for them to leave and be with us. Since Mom and Dad had not seen Myatt since delivery, I took them back to the room where he was at. I explained how scary everything looked because of the bilirubin light. Kristen said it was okay for them to come in the room. We washed up and went in. She removed the light, so it didn't look as terrifying. Besides this detail, I don't really remember anything else from this day. But the next night and the next morning will forever be in my memory. Sorry. At 7 p.m. we had shift change. Nancy was the NICU nurse. She was a NICU veteran. They all called her Nurse Nancy. She was also a godsend. Kristen told us that she had full confidence that Myatt would take the best care of Myatt. Since Dr. Rana had worked a 24-hour shift, the doctor that night was Dr. Chikalaka. We saw him several times, but mostly we talked to Nancy and the physician assistants. They kept us informed on what was going on. That night was really rough, so Andrew and I were behind the wall that I showed you earlier. That's where we slept. We didn't sleep. That's where we were at. Around 2:30 a.m. Friday morning, it started getting even worse. Myatt was struggling to breathe despite the help from the vent. People kept coming in back and forth, labs, respiratory doctors, nurses, medical assistants. Andrew and I tried to give them space. We stayed behind the barrier wall listening to everything. At one point, we heard the physician assistant say, "Oh my God, is that a tumor?" The physician assistant later explained to us that the medicine they had been giving Myatt had caused urinary retention. His bladder was so big that it was pushing into his diaphragm, and that's what she was feeling. Nancy came to tell us that they had inserted a catheter, and the amount of volume of fluid they pulled off Myatt was more than an adult size. That was probably one of the easiest fixes to all of Myatt's issues. They had also been watching Myatt's perfusion, the rate at which the blood would go to his extremities. They would come back, the doctors and nurses, and push on his hands and his toes and his feet, and they would count to see how long it took for the color to come back. Myatt's perfusion was worsening. He was becoming more hypoxic despite the use of the nitric oxide. They decided to emergently put him on the oscillating vent. They told us the long-term risk of being treated with this high-flow ventilation. They explained to us the concerns for his kidneys, his hearing, and his vision. Still being very naive, I felt like this was rock bottom. I feared him being on the oscillating vent, but little did I know that the worst was yet to come. Andrew and I left Myatt's room while all the changes were being made. We went to the bathroom to freshen up and brush our teeth. At this time, it was around 6:30 in the morning. We made it back to the room and waited for the doctors to round. There was still a lot of people coming in and out of Myatt's room discussing how they were going to care for Myatt going forward, and talks of transferring him to the PICU. Before the doctors rounded, I went to the restroom. This is the time that I had the most real talk with God I've ever had. I pleaded my case. I shook with fear and anger. I felt my heart physically ache for my infant son fighting for his life. I hit my knees and begged. I begged God not to take my baby from me. The helplessness, the sorrow I felt consumed me so fiercely that I wanted to puke, and I felt like passing out. I knew I had to gather myself and make it back to Myatt's room before the doctors rounded. I'm not exactly sure what time it was when the doctors rounded. They all came and stood outside of his door. They discussed a few things, looked in on him and us. They finally came into the room and told us that they would be transferring Myatt to the PICU on the 5th floor in just a short amount of time. They told us that he would be a potential candidate for ECMO. Dr. Rana came back in. She had been off that night because she just worked 24 hours, so that whole night she was off, she came back and she was on Myatt's service. I remember the room feeling cold and being kind of a gray hue. Dr. Rana came over to the chair where Andrew and I were seated in. She kneeled down on the floor in front of us, put her arms around both of us, and the words she spoke next I will never forget. She said, "Parents, it's time to worry. He might not make it." We were hopeless at this point. The hopelessness that we felt was crushing. So I left Myatt's room because I needed to update my mom and dad. As I walked through the double doors, my mom was the first one that I saw. She came and hugged me. I remember that my legs wouldn't bear the weight of my body anymore. I crumbled to the floor crying. The only thought in my head is, God, where am I going to bury my baby? Mom helped me to a chair beside my dad. The next thing I heard was Benton screaming and crying. He had just watched all that play out in front of him. That baby needed me then. I regained my composure. I hugged and kissed on him. My brother and sister-in-law took him away before I had to tell my family the news that we had just received. Mom was kneeling down in front of me. Dad was seated to my right. I explained to them the best I could about Myatt not getting any better, that he was rapidly declining and that he was being transferred to a different floor. With tears in my eyes, a shaking voice, I asked them, where am I going to bury my baby? I'm sure Mom said something, but at the time, all I can remember is the look on my dad's face. He told me, stop thinking like that. He scolded me. I felt like a small child. I know that he didn't mean it that way, but at that point, he had more faith than I did. I felt empty. I felt like a hollow shell of a person that was watching these awful events play out and having no control over them. I couldn't stay out there with them very long because I was worried that they would be transferring Myatt without me. When I made it back to the room, Kristen was back for the day shift. She and Nancy were packing up our stuff because we were fixing to move to the PICU. We followed the nurses to the PICU to the 5th floor, where we arrived at room 515. We were met by what felt like 30 people. There were so many people waiting to receive Myatt. Andrew and I walked into the room and sat in a chair. We squeezed into this chair made for one person. We held each other, not knowing what to do or what to say. Doctors kept walking into the room, looking at Myatt, looking at the monitors. They would look at us and walk right back out. This felt like it went on for hours, but it was within just a few minutes. Within minutes of arriving, they had automatically decided to put Myatt on ECMO. I didn't write this down, but I remember the nurses saying, is he always this color? Is this really his color? Like the whispers. At this point, Myatt was gray. He looked like a dead infant. While the medical team was discussing what to do, the chaplain came in and was talking to us. And I work in the medical field. I know what it means to have the chaplain called in. But during that minute, I didn't realize what they were preparing us for, what they were feeling us out for. The chaplain asked us about our faith. He asked us if we believed in God and where we went to church. He prayed with us and over us. During these moments, I forgot everything I knew. I didn't know why the chaplain was there, but in those moments, I didn't realize that he was preparing us for death. Seated in the chair with Andrew as I watched the flow of medical staff come in and out of the room, the feeling that was over me was nothing like I'd ever experienced before. Honestly, I don't know the best way to describe it either. I was physically drained from childbirth and lack of sleep. I was emotionally drained from the stress of what was taking place right in front of me. Despite everything that was happening, Andrew and I both kept our composure. The only true way to describe what was happening in that moment was God was watching over us. Because I am being really honest, I felt a sense of peace during that time. As an unbeliever, you may say that that was shock, but as a Christian, I feel like that was the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is something that has always been kind of foreign in my faith. I didn't really understand it. I didn't really have a grasp on it, and I didn't really know how I felt about it. But after this experience, kind of like Carla said, if you've never had that experience, it's hard to describe. But the sense of peace and the sense of calmness and the sense of just knowing whether Myatt was in my arms or God's arms, I knew he'd be okay. I didn't know if the Spirit truly dwelled within me, but during that time I know that he was. During those moments of medical chaos, quick decisions, and the chaplain coming back to talk to us, the only way that I can describe how I was feeling, that the Holy Spirit was with me. So Friday was when Maya was placed on ECMO. And there's different types of ECMO. ECMO is life support. It's when your lungs or your heart can't function. So a lot of people think of life support as just the breathing, just the intubation. It's not that. This is another form of it. It's a special procedure that they do in the room. It took them about an hour or so. Maya was put on ECMO on a Friday morning. The ECMO team, the specialists, this group of doctors that they have specifically for ECMO, they only round together as a group on Fridays and Mondays. Maya was put on a Friday. I think that was a God thing. Maya was on VV ECMO, which is venous, which is just for the lungs. There's also VA ECMO, which is for your lungs and your heart. This is a little overwhelming. This is Amory. This is not Myatt. But this is a picture. I got these from Amory's mom. This is the ECMO unit. All of this right here is ECMO. So the cannulas come from the baby's neck, they come down with the blood, and they come into this machine. So to get it to work properly, this is where your flows and stuff are at. So in a little bit, when I talk about Myatt shutting off his flows, that's what I'm talking about. But they have lots of tubing, and they told us, they said, your body is not made up of tubes, and so the plastic can clot. Myatt was already a bleeding risk because of his pulmonary hemorrhage from NEA. So when they had to increase the amount of heparin, the blood thinner, that just kept thinning Myatt's blood even more. But they had to make sure that his flows wouldn't shut off. So if he shuts the flows off, it's a really critical thing. It means that his life support machine has stopped working. So when you're on ECMO, you're given a nurse. That nurse is with you for 24 hours, 24/7. They do not leave the room to pee. They do not leave it to eat. They have to be relieved for that. So there's constantly somebody in that room with the baby. So there's lots of risk with ECMO, with anything really, but ECMO is the blood thinner. That was a risk. So with that, they would come in every morning and do a chest x-ray to see the ventilation. They would also do a head ultrasound to make sure that there weren't brain bleeds. We couldn't really stay in the room because of all of the equipment and all of the nurses being in there. So at this point, we were back at the FedEx house. I want to take a minute just to talk about that. The first night back at the FedEx house, I experienced my first ever panic attack. I didn't know what was happening during that moment. Everything that had happened with my dad had happened through the night. So at the FedEx house, my mom and dad had went to one end of the FedEx house and let Andrew and I have a moment with Benton. And we put him to bed and we laid down together and fell asleep. And I just remember mom and dad coming in the door and the light of the door opening. In my head, I just thought, what's wrong? What's happening? Why is somebody coming into the room? And I was trapped in my body. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't talk. I couldn't speak. I just had all these emotions well up inside of me. And then I was just so exhausted, I think I actually passed back out. I don't really know what happened, but the next morning I can remember telling mom about it, and she's like, why didn't you tell me what was happening? And I literally was trapped in my own self. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't talk. So if you've ever experienced that, it's a terrible, scary thing, but you're not alone in that. I kind of thought that, trauma and that kind of stuff was just reserved for like military people, the PTSD, that's all, that doesn't happen in normal day life, but that's such a lie, and I know that now. But Benton provided us much needed escape from everything that was going on. I felt a lot of guilt about leaving Myatt. I felt really horrible that we had to leave him up there by himself, but the nurses said, let us take care of this baby while you take care of your other one. And that was the most comforting thing, knowing that he was being taken care of and I was just a phone call away if something happened. But this baby right here was 19 months old. He was still very little and didn't know what was going on, and he needed his mommy and daddy too. So we dreaded going back in the mornings. We would eat breakfast with Benton. Mom would take him back upstairs, and that's when we would sneak away to go back to Myatt. And to walk over or drive over to the hospital was just the fear, the amount of fear of what are we going to walk into? What are we going to be told when we get there? We didn't get a phone call last night, but what are they not telling us? So the next morning, before I switch to the next slide, I want to explain how it was when we walked in. We got to the hospital, we walked in, and there were tons of doctors and tons of nurses in Myatt's room, and I've got my pump bag on my shoulder and my water cup in my hand, and we stop at the door and just see it, and we just turn around and leave. We didn't ask, we didn't know, we just left. And we went to the lactation room, and we sat and we cried and we prayed, and we were like, what's happening? And at this time, still a lot of people don't know what's going on. There are several people that are praying for us, yes, but there's not like a huge, vast number of people at this time that know what's happening. So Myatt was having a pulmonary hypertension crisis. When we walked in, he had shut off his flows on the ECMO machine, which means that his life support was not working. They were frantically trying to get it back on and turned back on, or he would die. So we walked into that. We went back to the lactation room with what felt like hours. We went back to the waiting area, and then Nurse Sarah came to us and she said, I'm sorry, we couldn't tell you what was happening. We were in the moment, which I was fine with that they were taking care of him and not us. And she said, he's actually doing really good. She said, after that, we got him, settled and stable, and he's doing well. So we go back in, and this is Myatt on ECMO. This is overwhelming to look at right now. This is half of his ECMO machine. You can't see it all. This is all of the medication that was keeping Myatt alive. This is his vent. This is the oscillating vent. And this is the nitric oxide that he was still on. So there's a lot happening in that room right there. But I want you to look at this green and white striped blanket. That blanket right there is from a family on Instagram called A Miracle Unfolding. He had not been laying on this blanket until this very picture. Talk about a little bit weird, but they laid him on that. When I walked into the room, I looked at his stats, and they were better than they had ever been on him on ECMO. And then I saw this blanket, and I just lost it. And the nurses are like, what's wrong? What's happening? And I told them the story about this blanket called A Miracle Unfolding, and they said that is one of the craziest things that they had ever heard. But they told us that they had to increase all of his medication and everything because he shut off his flows, so there were higher risk of things happening now. But I can remember the doctor, he was Grecian, so to hear him talk to you, you had no clue what he was saying. But at one point he walked by Myatt's window and he looked at the nurse and he went like that to her, and I said, Sarah, what was that about? And she said, we fixed him. That's what he told her. He said, we fixed him. So the ECMO coordinator came back in and told us that. She's like, I heard you had a scary morning. Are you guys doing okay? And I said, yeah, we're doing good. Everything's okay right now. He seems to be really actually improving. And she said, I just want you to remember, a good day on ECMO, your baby is still the sickest baby in the hospital. She didn't say that to be depressing to us. She just said it to really kind of make us aware that he was still very sick, even though he seemed to be improving. So before leaving every night, I would rub Myatt's head. That's why when he came home, he didn't have any hair on top of his head, because that's the only place I could get to him, and I would rub it, and I think I rubbed it all off. But I would sing, Jesus loves me, and I would tell him to rest. I would say, Myatt, it's time to rest. Let the machines do the work for you, and you rest. After that crazy day of walking on the pulmonary hypertension crisis, we hadn't seen Myatt with his eyes open. And that night, he opened his eyes and he looked at me. I've often wondered to myself, was he trying to tell me something? Because the next morning, another trial of fate hit. We left on a high because Myatt had opened his eyes. He had had a good day after that extremely scary morning. Things really seemed to be improving. Dr. Tom gave us the thumbs up and said that he had fixed him. The next morning we came in, we were on a high from the night before. The head ultrasound was running late. They usually did those at 5 in the morning. So the head ultrasound was running late, and we're sitting on the couch, and she comes in to do the ultrasound, and there were 2 people, so usually I work in radiology, that usually means you're trying to train somebody. So they were doing the ultrasound, and I'm sitting behind where I can see it. And just body language. I mean, working in the medical field, you gotta understand body language. If they don't look at you in the eye, or they're kind of standoffish to you, that usually means that something's not right. And I can see on the screen her look at it and look at Myatt and kind of point to the screen to the girl she was training, and then they never looked at me. And I knew something was wrong. I knew that something was not right. I had a gut feeling. The doctors hadn't rounded yet, so when they come to the door in the PICU, especially on ECMO, there's the attending, there is the fellow, there is the resident, and it's kind of where Grey's Anatomy has like the only thing right on their show, but they really all come in the room like that, and the resident would start, "This is baby boy Leath, he's so many days old on ECMO," and they would go through their big spiel, and I didn't go to the door that day. This was the only day that I hadn't walked up there. And the nurse kind of came over to me and she's like, "Kylee, what's wrong?" And I said, "He's got a brain bleed." And they said, "You don't know that?" And I said, "Yes, I do." I said, "I saw it on the screen." She said, "Well, the tech didn't get the doctor when she left." And I looked, and the tech had just grabbed the doctor's hand and they were walking away. And I told her, I said, "I know something's wrong." We were heartbroken. We were devastated. Our whole world came crashing down again because Myatt could not go back on ECMO. So if coming off of ECMO because of the brain bleed, if he didn't sustain life, he would die. And that evening, that afternoon, the nurses asked, they said, "Can we bring somebody into your room? Can we bring another family that's been through similar situation in?" And they brought in the Eves family. And that was Amory that I showed you a minute ago, her ECMO machine. And that just reminded me that when you're weathering these storms, you're never alone. You may feel all alone, but you're not. There's somebody there that's either had it worse or had it just like you. And they came into our room and they were talking to us about how bad their daughter had it. And they were looking at Myatt's flows and his vents and his settings, and they're like, "Oh, he's so much better than where Amory was." And they gave us this hope because we knew at this point that it was do or die for Myatt. That night, this was Wednesday night that all this happened, and I believe that this is the night that the church had a church-wide prayer for Myatt. Talk about timing, huh? I'm pretty sure that this was the night that everyone prayed for Myatt. This was the first time that I believe that I truly had posted on Facebook about Myatt. And social media can be such a negative thing and can be such a terrible thing. But in our experience with this situation, it was the best thing. We had so many people praying for us, people we had never met or talked to or anything praying for us. And the power of prayer was real and it was felt. This is a CT scan. As a CT tech, this was pretty cool to see because it was portable. They came to Myatt's room. You can't do this at other facilities. As a mom, it was devastating and terrifying to see what the screen showed. There were more brain bleeds than what the ultrasound showed. Myatt was worse off than what they had thought. Dr. Arun was the doctor that was on this night. Talk about another God thing. He was the best doctor. The nurses kept saying, oh, he's the doctor to have. He's the greatest doctor to be here tonight. He'll stay in Myatt's room the whole time. He won't let the fellow do all the work. He'll be right here with them. You have nothing to worry about. He actually wrote most of their protocols for anticoagulants, which is the blood thinners, which is what Myatt was on and why he was bleeding. He wrote those protocols. He was there that night. He stayed with Myatt. He prepared him to come off of ECMO. 2 weeks after Myatt came off of ECMO, that doctor left for Texas. Crazy, huh? That he was there that night and gone in 2 weeks. He stayed prepping Myatt all night. He would shut off his flows and see how he would do, see how his stats would do. He said he did it twice and that Myatt did fine. So the next morning, it was time to come off. They kept talking about how the team would come in and they would take Myatt off of ECMO and then they would see how he would do. They kept talking about it, and at 9 in the morning, they like swooped in and were ready. I mean, I was preparing for like later on in the day, like mentally trying to prepare myself, but at 9 a.m. they're like, here we are, he's coming off, you're done. This was also the same day that the church group was coming to feed us. I did not want you guys there. I didn't want you to see my pain, my fear. I was mad. I was mad that you were coming on this day of all days. Why? This was do or die. This was critical time. Why were you coming this day? This was not, Spencer had planned for this day, but he told me like 2 days ahead. Apparently he's not one to plan things out long term, I don't know, but 2 days ahead of time, he's like, hey, we're coming this day, here we go. I was scared. I didn't want you to feel my pain, my fear. It was terrifying to have you come, and I also didn't want to be away from Myatt. I wanted to stay in that room in my own little shell and not let people see how scared I was. But when I walked in and saw everyone, Marissa was the first one that I hugged, and it felt like home. My family was there with me. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone during all of this. They were there with us, praying for us, whether you were sending text messages or praying here at church. I can't talk about how good this church was to us, or is to us. Just everything that you guys did. Not only did they feed my immediate family, they fed the entire Le Bonheur Hospital. Everyone. They went to every room. John McKnight took a wagon type thing and went to rooms and gave people food. And I can remember my dad went with them. And Dad hadn't been on the 5th floor where Myatt was at. He's not good with medical stuff. He gets real misty-eyed and doesn't like to talk about stuff like that. But he went around all these rooms and was inviting people and taking food to them. And he came back to my mom and he said, you want to see some sick kids? He said, you go to that 5th floor. There's sick kids. He said there was this little baby in there by himself, no family, and all this medicine. And Mom said, Danny, you know that was your grandson, right? And he hadn't seen him. He didn't know. So Mom and Dad snuck away and they went and saw Myatt on their own because it was a lot to take in. It was a lot to see his little body like that. But when we came back from eating, this note was left on our door. Be strong, be brave, be fearless. You are never alone. This was from Amory's mom. I cannot speak enough about this family, the faith that they had through all their trials. I messaged Mallory, Amory's mom, and I said, I want to put Amory in my story. You guys are such a part of our story, our little ECMO warriors. Like, I really want to talk about you. And I quote, this is what she said, gladly. She is a child of God, and I want everyone to know her story and what He did for her. You think you have it bad until you meet people like this and what they went through. They were called in 3 times and told your child will not make it through the night. She had multiple surgeries. She had a GI bleed. She had an open bag on her stomach from where they had to go in repeatedly and do surgery on her. You think you have it bad? They had faith. They prayed with us and for us when their daughter was down the hallway just as sick. Amory's mom, Mallory, waited 40 days to hold her baby girl. 40 days. I waited 2. This is Amory. Isn't she cute? She is thriving. She is doing so well, and they are another testimony to the power of prayer. They are doing awesome. So August 5th, we got to hold Myatt again. This was the first time that Andrew got to hold him. Myatt gained 5 pounds of fluid on ECMO. So he was a big baby to begin with. He was a little sumo wrestler after that. He was busting out of everything. He was had lots of fluid on him. But this started a process of weaning sedation medication. So just like any drug addict, you can't just cut it off. You have to wean it. So you have to start gradually taking them off of it. So this was kind of some of the first times that we'd really seen him move, because they had him on medicine called rocuronium, and rock is like a paralytic. So his little lifeless body was just laying there because they didn't want him to rip out his cannulas if he started moving around. So this was the first time that we would get video messages from the nurses, and he'd be wiggling and stuff, and it just, I mean, with a brain bleed, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what it's going to affect, and we still don't. Myatt's over a year old, and we're still learning. But his was on the left side, so that affects your right side. And so Andrew's a therapist, and I'm a CT tech, and so we see this I see it on the front line, he sees it on treating it. And so it was really one of the scarier things for us, not knowing. And I can remember Dr. Arun telling us, he said, and he was Indian, so he was really hard to understand as well, but I remember him saying, "You're good parents, you'll take care of them." And I feel like I have that responsibility even more so because he told me that, but so Myatt is actually in therapy now. He's getting therapy for his weaker right side. But Andrew got to hold him. We started weaning sedation medicine. And this was extubation day. Breathing tube came out on August 9th, sorry. The nurses dressed him in this really cute outfit right here. We took off his shirt, but he had this little collared sailor shirt. It was really cute. The nurses are fabulous. His stats were great when he came off extubation. They just had a little nasal cannula on him, and they were monitoring him. Everything was perfect. This picture here, Andrew took. I never posted that one because I felt like I was getting too ahead of myself, that I was getting too excited that the other shoe was fixing to drop, that there was something, the highs and the lows of medical stuff, that there was something else kind of coming. So later on that evening, they came and they checked Myatt's blood gases by poking his little heel. His blood gases were 3 times what they should have been. He was breathing in well, and so his sats looked great, but he wasn't blowing off that air, that CO2 level. So it was sky high. So he got his little CPAP. That was forcing the air in, which was causing it to come out, and he sounded like a little, I don't know, I had this little farting noise. It was real, it was cute, but it was real awful. But that would blow all the air off and all those gases. He stayed on that from August 9th to August 13th. Dr. Tom, the thumbs up doctor, he said that Sundays are days of rest. And he said that on Sunday, we weren't going to do anything. We weren't going to trial Myatt off of the oxygen. We weren't going to change any of his medicine. He said Myatt needs to rest. He said you can hold him, you can touch him, but he needs to rest. The next day was day 19. this was the first time that Benton got to see Myatt. This was one of the days that we were able to rest him off of the CPAP machine and let him kind of breathe. His nose would get really irritated from the CPAP, so they'd let him rest for about an hour and just watch his levels and see how he did. And so that was the first day that Benton got to see him. And to tell you the joy of having both of them in my arms for the first time is like no feeling you can ever feel unless you've been a parent. There was always such an emptiness. We would leave, or we'd go to Myatt's room, and I felt empty because Benton wasn't there. And at the FedEx house, the FedEx house has this massive window, and you can see the hospital, and I would just sit there with Benton thinking, my other half is over there. He's sick over there. And there was just an emptiness and a hollow feeling in knowing that I needed them together. So this was such a great feeling, having both of them with us. So we got to bottle feed once he came off of CPAP, and if you've seen Myatt, you know that he doesn't miss a meal. So like he took this like a champ and kind of skyrocketed since then. He took really quickly to the bottle. We had to, so once you've had a tube down your throat for that long, all your sucking mechanisms and stuff are real out of whack. So we had speech therapist, occupational therapist, lactation consultant, everyone coming in trying to help him regain those. And so we had to lay him on his side. You'll see a picture of him in a minute laid on his side, because that really helped a baby to focus on what they're doing. And so we would do that with him. And he really liked having that CPAP off. Casey said that this is her favorite picture of Myatt. It is also my favorite picture of Myatt. He's like, I'm strong, and I got this off, and we're gonna skyrocket from here on out. We got to move to the 8th floor, which was terrifying in its own way, because with ECMO, there's a nurse in your room and a nurse outside of your room, and those are both nurses are for you specifically. On the 8th floor, there's like one nurse to 4 patients, so you're kind of like, help, come in here with me, and they're like, no, I got other patients to deal with. So we were kind of nervous about that. It was one step closer to going home, so we were really excited about that part. But he had to sit in this car seat before he could go home for almost 2 hours, and they had to watch his levels and make sure that his oxygen didn't drop. So knowing that we had an 80-minute drive back to Jonesboro, that was terrifying, because we just watched his levels the whole time, making sure that he was okay. He did really well through it. We really didn't have a whole lot of setbacks once we made it to the 8th floor, which was awesome, because Anne-Marie, she had to wear an NG tube. That's the tube they place in your nose to feed you. She had to wear that for a really long time, and there's lots of setbacks that can happen once you get to the floor. Maybe your breathing is not well or something, you get sick while you're up there. But this is where, too, I feel like the power of prayer. When we got to go home, after we were already home, Dr. Shapley, which is one of the ECMO doctors, she called me, and she said, I'm so sorry that I didn't talk to you while you guys were in the hospital. In her words, I quote, "It is remarkable how fast he recovered and went home." And that is the power of God in prayer. He recovered so quickly. He was on ECMO for 6 days. We were in the hospital for 28, and he went home, and he's happy and healthy now. There aren't that many success stories. There aren't success stories like that. So much that a doctor completely missed us in the hospital. He went home that fast. So I talked about laying him on the side. You can kind of see Benton giving him his bottle here, and he's laying on his side. We got to see some of the nurses, but Myatt had Harlequin side. I don't know if you can see in this picture here, when we would lay him on his side, his whole side that he was laying on would turn bright red. And that was terrifying. And we asked the doctors, and they said that has to do with the hypothalamus, which is in your brain. It has to do with that. And they think that his might have been damaged from his bleeds. But that resolved itself within a couple days. But talk about laying a baby on their side, giving them a bottle, and all of a sudden they're 2 colors. That was really scary. But that was truly our only setback once we made it from the PICU upstairs. He took food really great. He was able to come off of ECMO really quickly, and we got all the tubes out, and we went home. And that was a very exciting day. August 20th, we got to come home. And these are some pictures. These are some of the nurses. These are the ECMO coordinators, the ECMO specialists. This girl here, Nicole, she was in Myatt's room most of the time. She took on extra shifts just to be in Myatt's room. When we found out that he had the bleed, she held a prayer for us, saying that she felt confident that he would do well, and her confidence just inspired us as well. But I showed you this picture here. This is where Myatt's ECMO cannulas were. And that's just kind of a reminder that every trial you go through is not without scars. It's not without, Myatt's scars are physical. My scars are emotional. As you can tell, I can't talk about his story without crying. It's still very real to us and cut very deep to us. And I think that's fine. I think that's part of our testimony, that we care that much about him and about what God did to him, for him. And his scars are still there. He'll get older and they won't be as evident, and that may be the same for us, that they're still there, but they're not as strong. So when I read that little excerpt from Myatt's story, I started typing all that up and going back through his skinny chart that I was telling you about. I've underlined in red what Dr. Rana wrote. This is straight out of his medical stuff, and it says, very critical status for potential for sudden deterioration or death. The doctor wrote that about my baby. Sudden deterioration or death. And that was hard to read that and to type all this out again. But I see his face, and I know the outcome. I know what happens, and I know what our faith led us to. But some people don't have it that great. Some people don't get that. But Myatt is truly a testimony to prayer and how just battling through that and everything. And Heather Johnson was in Guyana, South Africa during this time. And so we had people in South Africa praying for us. I don't know these people. I've never been to South Africa, but they were praying for us. And I got an email a couple days after we got home, and my mom's family is from England. My mom's mom, her sister lives there, born and raised there, has family over there, and my mom's cousin Kevin messaged me. And I don't know if you know any British people, but they're a little odd, and I'm not sure very many of them even attend church at all. But Kevin messaged me and he said, I've followed your emotional journey, not thinking that I had any words to say that would give you strength, hope, or comfort. I've done two things in recent weeks that I'm not usually fond of doing. One is pray, and two is check Facebook. So you just really don't know how your story is going to affect other people. And I was talking to Carla about how she was in Haiti on a medical mission trip. I was at Le Bonheur with a sick baby. But the faith, the prayer, the Holy Spirit, and the stuff when she was talking up here was just like exactly what I felt. So God works through us in different ways, but even though you feel like your situation may be so out in left field, I mean, there's some similarities. There's a lot that you can play off of. So here's just a quick little run through of some pictures of my little nugget. I realized afterwards that my child has no clothes on any of these pictures, but those little rolls are pretty hard to resist. So you can tell that he's healthy. The first follow-up that we had at Le Bonheur, he was 6 months old, and the doctor walked in and she said, I'm gonna call dietary and tell him that she doesn't need to come in, he's good. Like, yes, he's good. We do own clothes, by the way. This was his 1-year birthday. We had lots of people show up for that. It was really a celebration of life for him, and you can see his little cheesy grin that he's living his best life. He's having a good time. We appreciate everyone that came to that. And this picture here just shows he's pretty chill. He's doing good, and we have a lot of people to thank for that, and also a lot of prayers, and keep them coming. You know, our road is not ended with this story. He's going to have struggles. We won't know until he probably reaches school age on what those will truly be from his brain bleeds, but his therapists tell us how he's smart because he will overcome what is in his life. He was really weak on his right hand, and he mastered everything left-handed. So when they did his eval for therapy, they had to write a detailed report saying how, yes, he passed everything with flying colors, but that was just his left side. So he's getting therapy for his right side. He's a little weaker when he walks on his right side, but you can't tell. He's running. I don't know how many of you saw on Sunday running out the doors. Like he's doing well, and so we appreciate everybody's prayers. And I know I've kept you way longer than what I was supposed to, so have a good afternoon.